Thanks for pressing play on another Dolphins podcast. Not only is the first wave of free agency behind us, we actually made it to the end of March before breaking out our first mock draft of the year. I have both Houtz and Kat with me today for our official 1.0 mock draft, where each of us did a mock focusing on how we would improve the Miami Dolphins. It's mock draft season, and that means we definitely want to hear your guys' thoughts, whether it's the 560 WQAM YouTube channel or emailing us at AnotherDolphinsPodcast@gmail.com. Be sure to let us know how awful these drafts are, how we should be improving the Miami Dolphins. Boys, my song and dance is over. Let's get right into it. The first round, we used the Pro Football Network simulator for this draft. I think we all went into it with no trades. As we go through this, we can kind of talk about where we could have or should have done some trades. But Kat, I just want to start with you. Can you give me if you could remember 2-3 guys who were on the board when you were up and who you decided to go with?
Yeah, so I really do have to talk through this one because when pick 13 came up, there were the consensus top two guys were Penn State tight end Tyler Warren and Texas offensive tackle Kelvin Banks. And I've probably watched more of these two guys than any other players in the draft because I've really wanted to get there with them for pick 13, and I just can't as far as the overall value. It's not to say they're not good prospects. Tyler Warren, look, I understand the allure with him. He's 6'6", he's 260. He had 100-plus rushing yards, for Christ's sakes, out of a tight end. He threw for a touchdown. He can moss people. He can block in line. He can play inside. He can play outside. I get it. But when it comes to him, does he have the hip flexibility for me to separate at an elite level at tight end? No. That's where I'm at with him. I still think he's a fantastic prospect, and he's going to go in the first round. And then Kelvin Banks, the more I watched him, the less I liked him. Very simply because I felt like against the best competition, he got knocked back a lot. And if you're talking about somebody in a phone booth, you're going to move to left guard. I think there's a high probability that he is just a good left guard. Is that really a needle mover? I say no. So this is something, and I'm very aware of the Dolphins' needs, but I also think that they need to build a long-term star here with the 13th pick. So even though it's not a need at all, I went with Mykel Williams, the edge rusher from Georgia. And I know I'd probably be the only one who would understand that, but this to me is somebody with star potential. If you look at mock drafts before the season, you'll see him going number one overall in several of these mock drafts. And the problem is week 1 against Clemson, he got hurt, and he played through that injury. He's 20 years old. He's already an elite run defender, and I feel like he would have put everything together this year if not for that injury early on. Now, the other side of that, too, is that, look, Josh Allen's going to be in the division for the next 8 to 10 years. Deal with it. Cry about it. Do whatever you want. But the reality is either you get somebody who's better than Josh Allen, a quarterback, which isn't going to happen, or you spend your resources trying to get Josh Allen on the ground. I believe that Mykel Williams at 20 and Chop Robinson at 22 or 23 years old, having them as your long-term edge rushers really gives you an identity. And more so at pick 13, I felt like you take all the needs out of conversation. He's the best prospect on the board. That's why I went with Mykel Williams.
Love that pick, Jake. I'm going to let you go before me. Is that okay to go out of order? Because I want to know what you took. I don't want to step on your toes, but I like you going out of the box there, Kat, and I can absolutely see why. I kind of like what I loved what you said about if you're not going to get a Josh Allen or someone better than Josh Allen, you got to find a way to bring him down. So absolutely understand this pick. Understand it's not a need, but good for you for taking that guy that you felt so highly of.
And the reason I love doing these mock drafts, we're going to have a 1.0 and a 2.0. This draft is how we would improve the Miami Dolphins. I think that when you kind of consider that this is a must-win year for Chris Greer and Mike McDaniel, things change, and we're going to do a 2.0 when we focus like that. But I completely understand where you're coming from, that if this was our franchise and you're not just trying to continue to throw, 2x4 after 2x4 at this huge giant leak that you just need to establish a strength. I completely understand what you mean, man. The Kelvin Banks moves have been so interesting because he was, one of the first guys in mock drafts, and Kat, you deserve credit because I think it was you first time we were talking about options for the Dolphins at 13. It was Membu. That was, right away. And I remember you getting some feedback, some guff about that being the pick. So I'm curious that if it's just one of those things, it's like we've reached the film stage of watching these guys, that someone started so high and then they're going to work their way down and you kind of have it teetering. But the only reason I did go with Kelvin Banks is because it's twofold. I completely agree with you. This guy might not end up being the best left guard, but I think there's also, especially in this fan base, I think there's some fear about Patrick Paul being a stout left tackle. So when I look at the Dolphins approaching this draft and approaching pick 13, not only are you getting a guard, if you were getting strictly a guard like a Tyler Booker, I would not be doing this. But when you have someone who could transition and be a left tackle, another option, and just more answers, I think that's why I settled on Kelvin Banks. Will Johnson went like 6th in my mock. Ashton Genty was there. I was kind of gonna go YOLO with that, decided against it, and I couldn't stomach Malachi Starks at 13. I thought it was just a little too early still.
And those are the two guys, Will Johnson and Armand Membu, that I'm rooting for to fall to pick 13. So in this scenario, they're off the board. And then you've got the obvious guys, Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, Mason Graham, and the quarterbacks who weren't expected to be there either. So that provides a little bit of context as kind of why I went with Mykel Williams, who I think is just take all the needs out, is the best prospect on the board here.
Yeah, and just to your point, Jake, I mean, I don't think Ashton Genty's going to be there. Like every day when I wake up, I'm starting to say, you don't need a running back, but if he falls there, I mean, you almost got to run that card in. I do like that you took Kelvin Banks Jr. because he is one of those guys that I lost a little bit of sleep over. He was there. Malachi Starks was there as well. I feel like right now, just watching what the Dolphins are doing, if like going into this, I feel like that might be one of our biggest needs. But I went with the YOLO. I did what I would do, and that would be the fantasy pick. I went with Tyler Warren. I know he's not a Brock Bowers type prospect. I know this guy isn't going to do anything elite, but he does so many things so damn well, right? He's going to make the run game better in the short yardage situations, whether that's in the blocking game or under center, where he was at quarterback 39 times last season, lined up 69 times in the backfield, 293 times in the slot. The guy can line all over. And then what he can do as far as, being a mismatch nightmare against some linebackers and things like that. You add him to this offense with Jonnu Smith, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Devon Achane, the list goes on and on. I think that can do so many different things. So I was going to cower it out. I was going to go with Malachi Starks because, again, I feel like that's maybe the highest need right now looking at this roster. But I went with the tight end pick, the flashy fantasy football pick. And I did lose a little bit of sleep over it, but I feel like that's the best place to go unless Will Johnson falls. I was hoping Will Johnson fell so damn bad.
I think, like, Josh, we started it as a joke, but I think there's actually something to having him be your tush-push guy, especially having Tua. I think that does make sense. And when you have someone like Jonnu Smith, he's under contract for one more year, so you kind of want to develop that plan. And you could kind of have your cake and eat it too, because you have Jonnu being that receiver, and I think everybody kind of understands that there's one Brock Bowers, and we're going to continue to reference this guy for a decade. Tight ends don't necessarily hit the ground running like that, so I think they could kind of start pretty slow with the playbook and work their way up with someone like Warren. But overall, man, I still just wish Will Johnson was there. That's what I'm going to go back to. Just looking at the needs on this team, like, Kat, how would you be on the phone in free agency right then and there when you're talking about like, a cornerback or another offensive lineman? How would you fill that other guard spot? Or are we going to be getting to that in, the next few rounds?
Yeah, maybe. I look out there and I see two players. Can you restructure Tua's contract? And basically you're going to be eating $5 million a year for.
Do you want to? That's a better question, right? Do we want to?
My answer is yes, because it's only $5 million a year, spread out per year over 5 years. I don't think that's a huge thing, and I think in doing that, you could go get Rasul Douglas, for a year, who's a good zone cornerback, declining, but a good zone cornerback, and maybe you go get Will Hernandez or a Brandon Scherf to shore up the other guard spot. Otherwise, you're going to have Liam Eichenberg, who's a massive hole on your team, and you're really throwing caution to the wind, too, with Storm Duck at cornerback, playing the amount of snaps. Even though I like the guy, I think he's a promising young prospect. But is he somebody that you want starting 17 games for you at cornerback? Maybe. I mean, I hope he shocks all of us, but it's a big risk.
And let me just clarify the whole Tua thing. I just want to be able to have that out. If something that goes astray this season, and you want to have that lever to escape in case of emergency. But I just don't want anybody to clip that and be like, "Houtz, you son of a bitch."
I agree with the Storm Duck point. I wouldn't hate him being the starter, but there needs to be another option, because if you have just Storm Duck and there's an injury for a week, that cornerback room is going to be looking ugly. One of the most mocked positions to the Miami Dolphins, especially in the first round, is safety. Considering the Dolphins' needs and considering that there are a couple guys at the top, especially Malachi Starks out of Georgia, would you guys get to a point in the middle, maybe late first round, where you'd start to consider trading back up with your second round pick to get that safety where you can kind of solidify a room there? The Dolphins, I don't know if they're going to be able to trade future picks the way the Miami Dolphins have been giving contracts this offseason. I think they've given one player guaranteed money after this season. It seems like Stephen Ross might be giving them some invisible borders. So I wonder if they could, leverage a future second or a future third. But would you guys get into an uncomfortable spot where it's like, we got to get this guy? It's too much of a value for somebody who can come in and start day one.
I'm more of a proponent of probably trading down at any point in this draft as opposed to trading up. But that's an interesting scenario. If you get somebody at 13 who you believe is a star, and then at the end of the first round or early second, if Malachi Starks is still there, I think that's a kind of a slam dunk starter. I don't like him at 13. That's a little bit too rich for me, but would you trade a 3 and a 5 to move up for Malachi Starks early in the second round? I think the value could be worth it there. Now, I wouldn't do it for Nick Emanwari, even though he's blown the doors off. Really, the pre-draft process. I think he's a fantastic talent, but I think he's a little more boom or bust than Malachi Starks is.
Yeah, I'd have no problem, Jake, trading back up if they, feel like this guy can help that defense in a way that they can. Another thing, I wouldn't really necessarily mind, say Jackson Dart falls or one of these quarterback Sanders or something, and some team comes calling up to 13. Then you trade back. Then I feel much more comfortable taking Malachi Starks than I might at 13. But then you're risking losing one of these elite players that's going to fall in your lap. So, if they vision that one of these guys in that secondary, Malachi Starks, were to fall to 2, a 3rd and a 5th, I would absolutely trade up for him, like Cat, projected. That'd sign me up for that.
We're going to flip it around for round 2. Josh, I'm going to put you right back on the spot here. Who'd you go with?
I went with Yona Savanaya. I had it written down. Arizona offensive lineman, durable AF. Chad Reuter says he has the body of a right guard, 6'4", 324 pounds. Started all 12 games in 2022 at right guard. Started 13 games in 2023 at 3 at right guard, 10 at right tackle, and then all 11 games last year, he had 5 at left tackle, 6 at right tackle. So the guy's played all over the offensive line, ranked 10th offense tackle at Combine per Next Gen Stats as far as their athleticism and things like that. But this is a guy who I think pre-draft had a lot more hype than maybe he's kind of seems to be falling back maybe a little bit with some of these offensive line prospects. But when I saw him sitting there, I ran to the podium because I feel like, Tyler Warren was kind of a luxury pick, maybe kind of threw things off for me, but getting this guy who can come in and play guard, maybe even play tackle if Austin Jackson or Patrick Paul's in the guy. I made that pick. So I don't know who you guys got, but Savanaya, I wanted to say it one more time. That was my pick.
There's a lot of interesting pronunciations here. And he would be somebody that if you're going to right the wrong with Robert Hunt, has kind of that same track where he's a tackle at Arizona, would move inside to right guard. And he's somebody that, he had a first round grade before the season, didn't have a great year, but really settled into that second round area and really showed at the combine, that he was a better athlete than given credit for. So he certainly should be a consideration. In the second round, I stayed on the defensive side of the ball and went with Florida State cornerback Azaria Thomas. And when I look at him, he's not a fit for every scheme. But as far as being an instinctive zone cornerback at 6'2", 197 pounds, I think he's your day one starter. I think he moves Storm Duck down. He allows Kader Kohu to stay inside in the slot. This is somebody who's, like I said, he's long, he's physical, he's reactive in zone coverage, and yeah, he only has, I think, 2 career interceptions, but last year Florida State was terrible, and he was targeted. He allowed 12 catches for 97 yards last year. Other than that, he was completely avoided. That's not his fault. I think that's actually a compliment to him. So I think if you take 2 big athletes who are 20 years old in Michael Williams and Azaria Thomas, then I think you're really adding something to your defense.
How would you compare him to someone like Trey Amos out of Ole Miss?
Thomas is bigger. He's more filled out. Amos is a little bit more fleet of foot. Mm-hmm. And Amos is a good prospect, too. I expect him to go somewhere in the second round, too.
I got caught looking at rankings here a little too much. Somehow Walter Nolan, who was like the 30th ranked prospect on Pro Football Network, he dropped all the way down to me. I just kind of ran up there. I'm just in such a weird spot where the Dolphins are at defensive tackle. It nearly screams that Calais Campbell will come back, but I mean, the Dolphins are really just testing their luck. So to see a prospect like Walter Nolan drop, it just made perfect sense here. And I might be on Twitter, might be on Blue Sky a little too much. Building in the trenches with Banks and Nolan just makes so much sense. They need that physicality up front. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and Nolan's an interesting guy. He was a former number 1 high school recruit, number 1 out of the entire class. So this is somebody who is definitely has a lot of pedigree to him, and he's coming off a really good season at Ole Miss. He's somewhere that could go anywhere from middle of the first round to middle of the second round, and I think that's key because the Dolphins have obviously a major need on the interior of their defensive line, and it is a packed class from round 1 to round 7.
Yeah, I love that pick, Jake. Pete Prisco had him going 13 in the Dolphins in his first mock draft, so that just shows you how I guess up and down maybe some people have him ranked, but yeah, if you can build the trenches inside like that, I mean, I love that pick.
In the 3rd round, the Miami Dolphins have already traded their 3rd round pick for Jalen Wright, which ends up being a higher draft pick that the Miami Dolphins used to select Devon Achane, but that's neither here nor there. Guys, I went full Miami, like Vice, like cliche quarterback room here. End of the 3rd round comp pick, pretty much a 4th round pick. Didn't have a great end to his college career, but I went Quinn Ewers. I think the Miami Dolphins need to keep building at the position of quarterback. Zach Wilson, okay, sure, fine. But if you want to get me jazzed up, maybe the season they're sitting there 3-6. They need somebody in there to cause some sort of spark. Let's see if Quinn Ewers can do it, save Mike McDaniel's job. I think the Dolphins are going to take some sort of dart here. I had Jalen Milroe on my radar as one of my 3 second-round picks. I think the Dolphins are going to right a few wrongs here and try to just push for a quarterback just for some depth, and we'll see if it turns into anything more than that.
It's a good idea to draft a quarterback somewhere every year, and the Dolphins haven't done enough of that, and that's a big reason why they've had to spend so much money on their backup quarterbacks, much to my chagrin. In the 3rd round, I went with a little bit of a boring pick. Oregon offensive tackle / guard, Johnny Cornelius. This is somebody that battle tested over 3,000 snaps in his college career, 4-year starter at right tackle, only allowed 2 sacks over the last 2 years at Oregon. I think he transitions really well from right tackle to right guard. So I look at him as somebody that could, if he were drafted here at the end of the 3rd round, I could project him as your day 1 starter at guard. I mean, how hard is it to beat out Liam Eichenberg? So
famous last words.
I'd be happy to see him here. He's a transfer from Rhode Island, but has seen a lot of college football. So I think he projects as a middle of the pack right guard, which I would take at the end of the 3rd round.
Yeah, and sometimes those not so sexy picks are the best picks, right? So we have no issue bulking up the offensive line. Jake, with you, Quinn Ewers, that's another guy who, heading into the year, a lot of people were so hyped about him just because he had a bad year or whatever. You can't necessarily overlook what type of prospect he could be. So love both your picks. I went with the safety. I needed to bring a safety in here. I was torn between bringing in Jalen Reed from Penn State or Jonas Sanker from Virginia. So I went with Sanker. 2024 stats, 98 tackles, 9 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 2 interceptions, 17 pass breakups. Reads and reacts really well on the clips I was watching. Constantly see him flying around the ball, ran a 4.48 40. Like the way they use him. He comes down in the box. They use him off the edge a little bit with blitzes. He can kind of line up almost everywhere. So 796 total snaps last year, 358 in the box, 139 in the slot, and 282 at free safety. So started all 3 seasons at Virginia, a playmaker, guy that you can see jump out on tape when you're watching Virginia. And again, I needed a safety pretty bad. So he can come in, work with Iffy, Ashton Davis, let the best man win, whatever it is. But wanted to bring another playmaker into that secondary. So I went with Sanker.
Josh, was Billy Bowman still on the board for you? That was one of the safeties I was looking at that spot.
I don't think he was, because it was between Jalen, because I watched Penn State games, so I knew Jalen Reed was solid, but then I went and looked at Sanker because I knew that was a name that stuck out. But no, I don't think Bowman was there. But I only wrote down like the first round and some of those other picks that I was really torn on who the board was leaving me with.
Josh, you want to keep us going with round 4? Sorry to keep you on the spot here.
Yeah, no, I should have went right into it. I want a defense tackle. I wanted to bulk up that defensive line. I almost went with him instead of Sanker, but I went with Sanker, so I came back around and Shamar Turner was sitting there, defense tackle from Texas A&M. Like I said, I almost pulled the trigger on him in the previous round. 6'3", 290 pounds. Could be an anchor potentially next to Zach Sealer, played all over that defensive line. So just to bring another guy in there, another guy into that room, a guy who, depending on where you're looking player rankings, he seems to be all over the map. So with any mock draft, right, some of these guys may be going higher, some of these guys may be going lower. We try to do our best, but I took Shamar Turner, started 12 games last season, 36 total tackles. In 2023, he was 3rd in the nation in blocked kicks. I thought that was an awesome stat until I saw it was only 2. So, Shamar Turner, come on down, man.
Yeah, and that's the thing is Shamar Turner. Just off the cuff, I think there's no way he's going to be there in the 4th round. But then you think about it, like this is like probably consensusly like the 11th or 12th ranked defensive tackle. So he probably will be there in the 4th round. I also went with the depth of this class at defensive tackle. I went with Savion Jones, the LSU defensive lineman here. This is somebody who has been kind of a tease at LSU over his career, has never jumped off the page as far as production, but had his best year last year, 4.5 sacks, 8 tackles for loss, 2 forced fumbles, but at 6'5", 6'6", 280 pounds, projects really well as a 3-4 defensive end. And one of the most impressive players during Senior Bowl week was Gray Zabel from North Dakota State. And he just dominated the week. But then you got into the actual Senior Bowl game, and Savion Jones dominated Gray Zabel, which really caught people's attention. I think he projects really well as a 3-4 end.
Cap, I've seen Gray Zabel going everywhere. Just to kind of talk about him for a quick second, where, if you had to, in your gut, where do you see him going right now? Because I see mock drafts him going in, Dolphins steal him in the 2nd round. But if you hear someone like Daniel Jeremiah talk, it's like he's going to go at like 21 overall. Some teams just going to take him and not worry about it for the next 4 years.
Yeah, I see him going in the 1st round, back end. Somebody who, at his size, and could play. He was a tackle at North Dakota State, went to Senior Bowl week, played center, played guard. He checks too many boxes. He doesn't have long arms, so he's not going to be an offensive tackle. But Graham Barton, I think, went 25th last year to the Bucs. I see him going right in the same range.
I was looking at Florida State defensive tackle Joshua Farmer in the 4th round. I was also looking at Kansas tackle Logan Brown. Like, I'm so in, just listening to so many people talk about this draft class, the offensive and defensive line. It just seems like you can really hit on these 3rd to 5th round picks. So I decided to instead just go with vibes. I went Oronde Gadsden the 2nd out of Syracuse, just because his dad played for the team, I just thought that this would be an opportunity. You do need some tight end depth, especially if you don't go someone like Warren early, someone to kind of develop, someone to let grow a little bit. And like I said, I know it's not the best analysis, but I'm going to go vibes. And then to kind of wrap it back with that round 4 comp pick the Dolphins have, I was looking at Jordan Phillips out of Maryland, but then Joshua Farmer was still there. So I went with him. Kat, what would you do if both of those guys were there, end of the 4th round, Farmer, Phillips?
Yeah, Farmer is projected a little higher right now. Jordan Phillips is a pure nose tackle. So Jordan Phillips is somebody who did not have a sack last year, but is really good at clogging run lanes. So again,
Benito
really
Jones.
from round 1 down to round 5. I mean, you can get value at any point at any point in the draft as far as the defensive tackle position. Josh Farmer's an interesting guy too, 35-inch arms, and went down to Senior Bowl week and had a terrific week too. But he's also in that cluster of there's not a lot separating like the 6th interior defensive lineman from like the 14th. And you should see all these guys called in the first 4 rounds of the draft. Speaking of which, at the end of the 4th round, I went with Walter Nolan's teammate, J.J. Pegues. Somebody who's a really fascinating guy. He's a transfer from Auburn, was a tight end at Auburn. And when he came over to Mississippi, actually played a lot of fullback. I think he had 7 touchdowns on offense. Now, that's not the reason I'm drafting him. I think this is a really underrated player. 14 tackles for loss last year and can really get into the backfield. If Savion, hopefully Calais Campbell comes back for one more year. I don't think he will, but if he does, great. And he's your starter with Benito Jones and Zach Sealer again. Savion Jones, I think, is somebody that can relieve Calais Campbell. But J.J. Pegues, I think, is somebody that on 3rd down you can use as your 3-4 rush end, and he can get into the backfield.
I like that pick. I honestly thought it said Pegasus every time I saw it. I was like, yo, man, Pegasus. And Jake, you said Josh Farmer and Jordan Phillips, both those guys I was sitting there contemplating with Shamar Turner. So it just goes back to Kat's point about this defensive line just being loaded with talent. For me, I went on the edge, Ohio State, Jack Sawyer. Jake, you mentioned Quinn Ewers earlier. This was a guy who, the name stuck out because of that strip sack he had that in the Cotton Bowl that kind of really, got his name out there. But this guy kind of reminds me a little bit of Andrew Van Ginkel. Isn't elite in a lot of ways, but, you can see him coming off the edge. He can do a lot of things. He's always around the ball. I think he's a little bit undersized, but 59 tackles last year, 9 sacks, 6 packs, breakups, started every game for the Ohio State University, and you know how good their players are. So he was available. A guy I recognized, a guy who can come in and, add some more pass rush capabilities to this unit that, we are so excited about with Chop Robinson, Bradley Chubb, and Jalen Phillips. So Jack Sawyer, you're a Miami Dolphin.
I think when people talk like a culture fit, they instantly think of like the, first one in, last one out. But I mean, Andrew Van Ginkel was such an awesome culture fit in Miami where I'd love to see that with Jack Sawyer too. Going into the 5th round, we're on to day 3. My mind instantly went running back. We know who the coach of the Miami Dolphins is. I saw Dylan Sampson there at Tennessee, and then I thought, let's slow down a little bit. Jalen Rivers, Miami offensive lineman, was a little interesting. I settled on Luke Conda, Cincinnati guard, 6'4", 319 pounds. Pretty much, I'm not going to overcomplicate things here, guys. In the later rounds, when I start reading that a lineman can do well getting to the 2nd level, let's just try it. Let's see if you can be a decent offensive lineman for the Miami Dolphins, especially at guard. Let's take a couple shots here.
Yeah, and staying with that, you mentioned Jalen Rivers, and that's who I went with in the 5th round here. And, somebody who's played tackle and guard and isn't the best scheme fit, not the best at getting to the 2nd level, but I think if you're looking for somebody that's just going to be able to keep Tua clean for 3 or 4 seconds as a pass protecting right guard, I think he fits the bill in that situation, and he has the flexibility also to play tackle.
All right, I got to be honest. I'm a moron. I sat here and I skipped a pick. So Jack Sawyer was actually my 5th pick. So let me back it up to that. Jackson Slater, offensive guard, Sacramento State. He was the guy I took in the 4th round at 135. Started the final 9 games in 2021 at left guard. Never looked back. Back to back. First team All Big Sky. Made a name for himself at the Senior Bowl. So I took a guard that can also play center there in the 4th round. Then I took Jack Sawyer in the 5th round. Sorry about that.
Nah, man, that's kind of the thing here. They're all going to be in the hunt for this situation. They're going to be going in this range. Jalen Rivers was actually there for Miami's second fifth-round pick, but I ended up going Iowa's Sebastian Castro. I kind of saw a couple buzzwords that stuck out to me that weirdly remind me of Skylar Thompson. I'm going to pump the brakes real quick. A little bit older, not the greatest athlete, but somebody who we thought or would assume knows what they're doing. Somebody who's been in college for a long time. The ceiling might not be high, but I think the Dolphins need just guys who have a good floor at safety. You hear Javon Holland, when he left Miami, he really dove into the idea that the Dolphins are building up front. They invest in edge rushers. They've invested in linebackers. Defensive tackles, we'll see, but you can kind of sneak by with some safeties who might not be the most talented guys. So if you could get someone like Sebastian Castro in the fifth, maybe a part-time starter this year, develops into just a solid safety in a year or two down the road, that seems like a pretty good outcome for, a fifth-round pick.
Yes, Castro, I compare him a lot to Taylor Rapp. As a safety, not the fastest guy, but very, very instinctive. And if you're talking about a zone defense where you don't have to cover as much ground, I think Castro would make a lot of sense, especially at this point. You're one step ahead of me too, Jake. I went with safety as well. But this guy's actually a cornerback in college who I think transitions really well to safety in the pros. That's Tommy Hill from Nebraska. 6'1", 213 pounds. I love these types of picks because he's a little bit too slow to play cornerback full time. But I think he's a hard hitting cornerback, and that transitions really well to the safety position. So I think he would be a steal and kind of some low hanging fruit here in the fifth round.
And Chris Greer kind of does his best work sort of in this later round, at times. So, I'd like to see the depth pieces that he brings in. For me, I keep thinking about Mike McDaniel saying how they're bringing in 2 to 3 running backs this season. So I finally pulled the trigger on a running back. At this point, Jack Sawyer, some of these other guys, I'm going based off their names, based off of guys I remember watching, based off guys I went back and watched. And I went with RJ Harvey, running back from UCF. He's a bit undersized, 5'8", 205 pounds. But let's be honest, that's never stopped Mike McDaniel at all. Carried the ball 579 times. His collegiate career for 3,792 yards, 43 touchdowns, had 22 touchdowns last season. Could be an asset in the passing game. He's not very good in pass protection, but he's a smaller back, that can run between the tackles, can take on a little bit of that, isn't scared to get a little bit more physical is what I'm saying. So adding him to that room, he was a guy who every time you saw UCF highlights on the timeline, it was always RJ Harvey, it seems. So again, I don't know how much of a need it is to bring in a running back at this point. We're getting down towards the end of the draft. They love to bring in the undrafted acorns. Maybe just wait till then, but I saw RJ Harvey, pulled the trigger here, got my running back. Who's up?
Josh, I think you're spot on. Kat, what would you say the odds are that the Dolphins draft a running back? I'm going to say it's over 50%, probably close to 75%. I think it seems like it's going to be a Mike McDaniel thing if he has a couple draft picks to at least throw a dart.
Yeah, with 10 picks, and there's room on the roster after Achane, Jalen Wright, and Alexander Madison. I think there is room for a fourth running back. I'd be very surprised if they didn't draft a running back somewhere. Probably, right about here. And Harvey would be great value here too. Again, you look at the deep positions in this draft: running back, tight end, defensive tackle. Harvey is somebody who is probably consensusly 14th or 15th running back on the board. And I think in another year, he probably would go in the third or fourth round. But because it's so deep this year, I could absolutely see him falling to round 5.
The second, Miami had 4 7th-round picks for about a week before one was taken away. I was pretty much penciling in 2 of those should be running backs. But I know these picks aren't the most hype, but for my first 7th-round pick, I went Carson Vincent, Alabama A&M. Not really a dynamic player. He struggles with penalties. He's a little slow. But guys, we're talking 7th round here. So I'm trying to envision maybe somebody who you're putting on the practice squad. And then it's week 16 and 17. And you need just a depth piece at left tackle where he's going to come in and strictly be a left tackle if he plays. I kind of saw that as like a track to playing time for someone like Carson Vincent. Again, I'm not going to sit here and say he could be a starter one day. But just as a steady backup piece in the 7th round, it made a little sense.
Yeah, raw player, Alabama A&M, I believe. And he's somebody that certainly has some tools. Struggled a little bit during Senior Bowl week, which is probably why he falls. He's going to fall down to late day 3. I went running back, and I went in a different direction here with Woody Marks, the running back from USC.
Great name.
He played 4 years at Mississippi State and 1 year at USC. In his career, in 5 years, 261 catches. So this is somebody that has caught a lot of footballs and has a career yards per carry average of 5.9. So this is somebody that, if you're looking to get somebody on your team to add kind of a different wrinkle with receiving skills out of the backfield, Woody Marks might be your guy there.
He sounds like one of those guys you scout in like Madden or college football where they have like that hidden grade. Like this dude's like the best player in the game, it sounds. For me, I went with, again, I'm trying to stick with guys that I've seen, who I've watched, I'm a little bit familiar with their game. Francisco Mauigoa. It's not because his name has Maui in it. I looked up the pronunciation. Linebacker, Miami. This guy reminds me of those linebackers that we grew up with, the thumpers, the guys that can come in. 2-down linebacker, started for Washington State in 2021, transferred to Miami where he led the team in tackles these last 2 seasons. A playmaker. Again, he's not going to be able to cover very well. He's probably going to be a guy that's in there on early downs, but the Dolphins, they could use the depth at linebacker. So he's the, played at Miami, backyard guy. Just bring him in. And he also has the aesthetic. He has the long curly hair out the back. He's got like a visor on. So thumper made me think of Reuben Foster a little bit when I was watching it, and I had a little bit of a soft spot for Reuben Foster. So now we go. It is. You want me to do my next? Sorry,
yeah, go ahead.
I don't really have much on this one, but I was eyeing him up in the last pick. Definitely need to bring in a quarterback, some kind of camp arm, right? So Brady Cook, quarterback, Missouri. Like I said, I needed a quarterback. Completed 62.6% of his passes last season for 11 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. I believe he finished like 4th or something, or 2nd with the athleticism ranking according to Next Gen Stats at the Combine, probably because he ran a 4.59 40, but can do a little bit of that too. So I just wanted to bring in a guy that, who knows, you throw a dart, maybe they can build him up to be something, but and his first name's Brady too. So let Brady cook.
I also went with Brady Cook in the 7th round, and I'm a Mizzou fan, and yeah, he didn't have a great year. I mean, he was supposed to be a 2nd or 3rd round pick, and he and Luther Burden, that offense was just weird this year. It did not perform up to expectations. But I think from a tools perspective, Brady Cook absolutely is worth a shot here, late in the 7th round. And so that was one of my 7th round picks, and to round everything out, my final pick was Isaiah Nayer, the wide receiver from Nebraska, 6'4", 218 pounds, runs a 4.41. Now, his downfall is that he plays wide receiver at Nebraska, they're not known for throwing the football very well. So somebody who's never had over 600 yards in his career, but somebody that definitely has the triangle numbers. He's got the height, weight, and the speed. And when you look at it, I'm hoping that he can make the team as a gunner. And because if Ryan Stonehouse, if the one thing against him is that he outkicks his coverage a lot, you're probably going to need a speedy guy there, whether it's Nair or whether it's somebody else.
Sounds like Turbo Taj Washington's noise to me. I went Maxon Hook, Toledo safety. He's spent 4 years playing in Maction, so he has to adjust to the NFL level, but it kind of goes back to why I took Castro in the 5th round. The Dolphins need to shoot a couple darts at safety, and I just think you have some sort of potential here where there's a solid foundation to kind of see if, all right, let's see if we can make you a comfortable starter for 4, 5, 6 games a year and just settle there. And then to round out my draft, Arizona running back Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, East-West Shrine Bowl MVP, 97 yards, 2 touchdowns and 11 carries, and can pass protect. That's where I thought he'd be a little different than what you have in Jalen Wright, Devon Achane, somebody you could trust, and you could see a little bit of a different path to playing time for a running back like that. Before we wrap up here, guys, was there anybody you were really hoping would fall, or there was a name that just kept kind of following you around in this draft that you wanted to draft but just couldn't?
I go back to Membu and Will Johnson. If
That's
either
fair.
one of those two guys are there at 13, I think those are A+ picks all the way around. And yeah, once you get into the 2nd round, it's interesting. Walter Nolan was on the board there for you. For me, a guy that was there in the mock draft, but I thought would have been cheating to take, was Kenneth Grant. But I look at that and I'm thinking, is it impossible he falls that far, given that he's raw and that he's kind of projected as a 2-down defender? Maybe not in a deep defensive draft class. I think he'll go far before when the Dolphins pick in the second round, but there's going to be some guy there in the second round that you thought there's no way in hell I thought he'd be there.
Would you use your third round pick if you start to see Kenneth Graham falling? If like you had to go up and get him?
Yeah, I think I would. If you're saying that you can come out of the first two rounds with Armand Membu and Kenneth Grant, I mean, for a team that's
sign me up today.
Yeah, I mean, for a team that's trying to be more physical, that fits the bill to say the least.
Yeah, I don't really have any. I don't know if I ever gave my last pick, so I'm just going to throw it out there. Jason Marshall Jr. Can cornerback. I don't know why a guy who wanted Will Johnson to fall in the first round, waited this long to get a cornerback because that doesn't really help the room at all. So I might have to go the Cat's route and call it Rasul Douglas, but I saw Jason Marshall in there. But for me, Jake, I mean, I go into this and I feel like the Dolphins have done a great job of patching all those tiny little holes and, being able to go best player available. But I still sat there with, the board the way it was and felt like Malachi Starks almost had to be the pick. And I just hate going into the draft feeling that way. But I think I might put a little bit more of an emphasis on the safety position and maybe these teams do.
Kat, what would you be looking for if you tried to trade down here? If you wanted to get Starks at like 23, I know that's like a really broad question, but what would you need to see as a return to be like, all right, like this is something I'm definitely interested in? And I'd have to assume for someone like Chris Greer and this coaching staff to be interested in a trade, they'd need picks for this year.
Yeah, I think it's really dangerous to trade down, even though I usually haven't seen a trade down offer that I don't like. I believe in getting as many picks as possible on draft day, which the Dolphins obviously haven't done a lot of over the last few years because they've traded a lot of them. But it would have to at least be a second round pick. I mean, I think, like, for example, if you start moving off of guys like the ones we've talked about, like the Michael Williams, like Tyler Warren, and now you're moving down into the 20s to pick up just like a third round pick, I don't think it's worth it in this type of draft because I really feel like there are only about 15 to 17 really true first round picks in this draft. It's not a great draft year.
And for as nice as it would be, again, I feel like someone that we're not sitting here like someone that we don't have in our mock drafts, I feel like someone's going to fall into the Dolphins' lap where it's just too good to pass up, like a Membu, like whoever it is, because he wasn't available in my mock draft. He was nowhere. I think he went like 5 or 6 or something.
Kat, is there any sorry to keep dragging this along, Will Campbell, there's been some arm length talks here. What do you make of that?
I'm one of those people that stays true to the 33-inch arm length.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Will Campbell at the combine was 32 5/8, and just a couple of days ago, I guess they stretched him out, and he was 33 now. So I don't know quite what to make of that, but you take a look at how many offensive tackles in the NFL are quality tackles that have below 33 inches. You've got maybe Alaric Jackson, the left tackle from the Rams, Braden Smith, the right tackle for the Colts, and that's about it. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Now, Will Campbell, too, can move inside to guard as well, but I like Membu moving into guard more than Campbell because I think Campbell gets really upright in his stance. So he's going to be a fascinating one. But yeah, it's the 33-inch arms. It's almost an exact science.
I don't know if you saw this, but I guess he was meeting, might have been the pro day recently, and he said he met with 2 teams that would play him at guard. Because they already have left tackles. Would you be content with that as Miami's 13th pick if somehow this stretch gate turns into anything more than just like a March 28th talking point?
I think he's a high floor prospect, either a tackle or guard. I think if you get him, the odds of him busting out of the league are very, very small. But the other side of that, the comparison I use is Peter Skoronski from a couple of years ago. The Titans took him, I think, 11th overall, and he fell to 11th overall because of his arm length. So they took him, they moved him inside to left guard, and he's a good player. But is he somebody that's moved the needle for the Titans? No.
You can do a lot worse than Will Campbell, right? I guess that's the best way to put it. But I can see why you prefer Membu and some of those other guys. But I mean, I don't know that there's a pick right now I'm sitting here thinking about like that would really make me mad, right? Like I don't know if I'm in that situation, but it's Chris Greer. I mean, he'll surprise us.
A pick that would make me Booker. I think Tyler Booker at 13. And I think that we're also at a point though where that kind of would be a reach as is. I don't think most people are mocking him that high at this point.
That was like
final
1
question.
week, right? Everyone was about it for 1 week. He's like a top 10 pick or something.
This will be the last question. Is there a player there at 13 you would actually be genuinely upset about?
Who? Let me think here. That could realistically be taken. I would say Nick Amon-Mori, I'd say, is someone I've seen in a few mock drafts. Great physical specimen, and I've heard some Derwin James comparisons. I don't quite see that. That would probably be one I wouldn't love. Jahdae Barron too is somebody I think is a really good player. I think he's going to be an elite slot defender at the next level. As far as an outside boundary corner, I'm not in love with it. So, yeah, I wouldn't be crazy about that. Walter Nolan would love in the second round, but in the first round, that would just be kind of an okay pick, in my opinion. So there are a few guys that, I wouldn't love it. There's not one specific guy that I'd be like, oh man, my remote's going through the TV if it's this guy.
Those thoughts can always change, especially being a fan of the Miami Dolphins. But thank you all so much for listening to our Mock Draft 1.0. As I said at the top, whether it's 560 WQAM on YouTube or emailing us at AnotherDolphinsPodcast@gmail.com. Let us know. Kat and Houtz, thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you all so much for listening to Another Dolphins Podcast. Have a great week, and most importantly, fins up.
Fins up.
Fins up.